started. People can start coming in while we talk, but today's going to be very informal. We are going to be discussing a little bit about where G20 IF20 has been and where we're hoping it will go. I'm very excited about the conversation because I do hope that those here in the audience will also be very participatory. So we're hoping to have some real discussions here as we move forward. Just to let people know kind of what the agenda is going to be, we are going to be having each of the people just talk for a second. Each of us will only be talking for about 5-6 minutes, but we're really hopeful that, that you'll be able to kind of get a flavor of what we want to discuss. First, Dr. Adams, Brian Adams, will be discussing the IF20 beginnings, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to do your own introduction, because each one of you, I know, has a whole bunch of different hats, and so I don't know which hats you want to describe yourself as in terms of this context. So we'll first have Brian talk a little bit about the beginnings, since he was there at the beginning. And then Sherrie, Steiner, will talk about the book, very specifically. And then Yoshinobu will also be discussing about the international nature of G20 Interfaith Forum, specifically his experience in Japan when we had the forum there. And then I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about the communications and what's been happening in IF20 in terms of the communication policy over the last 10 years. So let's get started with Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're in Africa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good seeing you. It's fun to return to the continent. It's just been a while since I've been up in Africa. I used to live in Tanzania and I lived in Mali as well for several years. And traveled and worked in other countries around. It's just beautiful to be back here. But this is about the G20 Interfaith Forum history, not mine, so I'll move on to other things. But the idea for the G20 Interfaith Forum it started to take shape in 2013. So just so you know my role in this is it was through my center that the idea was developed, and we worked quite a bit on it, and then reached out to Cole Durham to partner on this and to bring it forth. But the idea started at a little cafe next to the Orthodox synagogue in downtown Brisbane, Australia, where I had been mulling over this idea of what to do when the G20 came to Australia. It was hosted in Queensland, in Brisbane, and I thought, you know, there must be some opportunity for not just my center, but the community with which I engage through my center to have an impact on the G20 in some way. So the center was the Center for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue. And so I was chatting with my friend, my Orthodox Jewish friend. His name is Ariel Heber. And he said, you know, we should have an interfaith forum. So the actual idea came from Ariel Heber. I've got to make sure that that's clear in the record. And we began to work from there. As I pondered it a bit more, I realized there's a gap in the G20 consultative process. They have the C20 and a number of other letters from the alphabet that they turn to, but none of them explicitly engaged with religious perspectives. And the reality is, if you are making economic decisions, yet ignoring one of the major drivers for economic decision making, which is a person's belief, faith system, philosophical tradition, then how sound are those decisions that are being made? And so we began to work on this idea, and it was said in a plenary a day or two ago that we didn't engage with the G20 at the start. It wasn't until a particular person came on board. That's actually not correct. From the very start, as Asher would know, as Sherrie would know, as Yoshinobu, as Juan would know, we were wanting to address the G20 agenda from the very start. And we thought, let's not just have a repetition of what has happened before, where faith leaders come and make a statement. Let's gather together business leaders, but with a faith perspective, politicians, members of the judiciary, academics, civil society leaders, all of them coming with the given permission, almost in a sense, to use their faith-inspired traditions and beliefs to inform whatever we could put forward to the G20 process. And that's how it began, was back in 2013. The G20 was held in 2014. And it was quite interesting. There was the recognition that we had touched upon something whose time had come was palpable from the very start. People were thirsty for this type of approach to engaging with policy and decision making in the world. Now there are other challenges, of course, and I'm happy to discuss those in the question and answer period. But that's a bit of the root of how this began. Does that take us far enough?
Perfect. Yes, it does. And I love the context that you're giving us in terms of the way this all began, because boy, things have grown and changed, and the world we live in is very different than it was 10, 11 years ago. So and that's something that I do want to talk about as a group when we get to the discussion time. So now we're going to talk just for a moment about why we're here. And that is, the book. And so Sherrie and Jim Crispy are the two that were the editors, and kind of you were really the person that had this conception. This is truly a volume 2, and so I'm going to give the time over to Sherrie to talk about these 2 volumes, specifically the latest one that is very much specifically on G20 in the last 5 years. So Sherrie.
Thank you, Marianna. So thank you for being here today. The first point I want to make is that this is an academic publication, and I'm serving as the historian, so I'm not really part of the communications team. This is a document that has been blind peer reviewed by someone that Brill chooses. Brill is the publisher. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, religion publisher in the world, founded in 1683. And they use a double-blind peer review process. But then, it's reviewed by the series editors, Laurie Bowman, Peter Beyer, University of Ottawa. It doesn't stop there. They have an editorial board, Afe Dogma of University of Edinburgh, Elizabeth Coleman of Monash University, Elaine Kuhl of Aarhus University, Mary Jo Meeks of University of Missouri, and Linda Woodhead of University of Lancaster. And they push back, and they give feedback, and it's not a guarantee that your work is going to be published until all of the concerns in detail are addressed. So Volume 1 was the first to use the theory frame that I'll be talking about to be published by Brill, and there was a lot of back and forth before they agreed to publish it. It documents religious leader engagement with the G+ system for 10 years prior to the beginnings of what we now refer to as the IF20 that my colleague was talking about. There was religious leader engagement with the G8. So Volume 1 begins in 2005 and documents religious leader engagement with the G+ system from 2005 through then the beginnings of when the G8 engagement dissipated. That's when halfway around the world, G20 interfaith engagement pops up. So it's a fascinating kind of God thing that we talk about. And the Volume 2 that we're talking about today is a co-edited volume that Jim Christie, if he would be here, would love to be up here with us. He sends his regrets. He wishes he could be here. He'd be here if he could, but health issues prevented his participation. There are 22 contributors, faith leaders, academicians, activists that have all contributed to Volume 2. Volume 2, the edited work, is covering 2018 through 2023. So with the pictures that were up there, Australia, Istanbul, China, and Germany are covered in Volume 1, and then Argentina, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Italy, the special case of Indonesia and India are covered in Volume 2. With regards to significance of the work and contribution to new knowledge, which is a requirement for Brill to publish, you have to show what's new here. What we talked about was how it's a sobering but optimistic account of the role of religion in global governance. We document religious diplomacy with the G+ system to evoke new possibilities in an effort to influence globalization to be more equitable and sustainable. A lot of academicians have referred to globalization as being out of control, but we talk about it as set within a political process that can be influenced through religious leader engagement. And then we use historical materials to then document that. In terms of academic reception, Reading Religion, which is the scholarly book review section of the Journal of American Academy of Religion, which is the largest religious scholars professional outlet in the field of religious studies. They considered it, quote, indispensable literature for religious studies, scholars, and political scientists, and described it as rigorous, inclusive, and extensive. Now that's Volume 1, but Volume 2 only came out the day before I got on the plane to come here. So although it's too soon to be able to say what the academic contributions, how it's going to be received, because we use the same theory frame and it's connected to Volume 1, it's likely that it will be taken seriously. Chatham House, which is one of the world's leading think tanks, also publishes the journal. It's associated with Oxford. And their International Affairs journal, when they reviewed it, they said it goes beyond traditional social science narratives to gain further understanding of the evolutionary process of societal environmental relations in the age of the Anthropocene. Which takes us to the theory frame of this book. It's different than the perspectives that most participants and speakers bring to the presentations they make here at the IF20. The theory frame includes not just a religious studies perspective, an economics perspective, a political perspective, but it has broader scope conditions to take into account changing environmental conditions and how those changing environmental conditions shape human societies. Because of that theory frame, there are some voices and conclusions in these volumes that are very different from some of the more optimistic assessments that might be taken if one doesn't have the scope conditions as broad as taking the environmental changes into account. So climate change urgency, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, these things are taken seriously and it contributes to the assessment of the IF20 contributions. And it's a bit darker perhaps. I mean, if I were giving a grade on IF20 performance on these, I'm not sure it would be a passing grade. And that's because of scope conditions. So that has to do with the theoretical framework. The summary of Volume 2, it's organized into 3 sections. Chronicling, which chapters 2 through 5 chronicle the 5 fora. Marianna will be, Richardson will be talking about the communications team. A quote by Catherine Marshall chapter, she says, that the IF20 developed and expanded its scope and roles from an essentially academic effort, which you would maybe disagree with, but they've become increasingly engaged with the G20's widening global agenda encompassing the SDGs and responses to urgent crises. The fact that there's differences of opinion in the edited volume is actually considered an academic strength of the volume. And that's because there's multiple perspectives, multiple disciplines represented in the volume. Audrey Kitagawa documents a chapter on the anti-racism initiative, and she chronicles two dimensions of impact, one being the recommendation that the AU, African Union, be added to G20 in India in 2023, but also the impact of the deep sea mining webinars that contributed to Tuvalu reversing its decision to have contracts on deep sea mining in their area. In part 2, it's on commentary. Mohammed Abu Nimer and Faisal bin Abdul Rahman bin Muammar and Mohammed Othman address religious actors and policymakers. Yoshinobu Miyake does chapter 7. He'll be speaking about his perspective coming from Japan and the interfaith contributions. Chapter 8 is very interesting by Christina Tobias Nahi of Islamic Relief, because she talks about navigating alignments and the geopolitics of geopiety from the perspective of an Islamic NGO being in the diaspora and navigating the global ethic, the one ummah with many views, and how the Muslim world is actually a mosaic, non-monolith. In chapter 9, Azakaram analyzes the IF20 as just one of several multi-faith, multilateral organizations, comparing and contrasting the IF20 to Parliament of the World's Religions, the Temple of Understanding, Religions for Peace, and United Religions Initiative. In chapter 10, Fletcher Harper and I, he's from Green Faith, we review the IF20's record on climate change and make several recommendations on that. James Taylor Christie in chapter 11 documents national actions that have been taken by members of the IF20 network, because one of the things that we see is when the networks participate in the network, it impacts the network in their own countries. So he gives 3 case studies: the case of Dr. Tan and COVID vaccine movement, the case of the Hakenkreuz and the swastika, and the case of the collaboration with the IF20 on webinars with Russia, Ukraine. Then Alec Barabek, our youth member with ACWAY, and I talk about efforts to pass the torch of the IF20 to adult young leadership. In chapter 13, Sandra Coyle and I discuss funding the work using the model of the network of networks and the strengths and weaknesses of that model. In chapter 14, Paul Morris offers a diasporic Jewish perspective, making the case for cosmopiety, a cosmopolitanism within multi-religious networks. And he uses that framework for giving some advice on how conflict can be handled in a way that reflects opposition that has loyalty and trust built into the conversation. We hear from the president of the IF20, Cole Durham Jr., in chapter 15, and I'd like to read a quote from him, if that's all right. He says, "Gratitude is perhaps the most appropriate final word in this chapter. In the end, what has always been the most significant accomplishment achieved through the IF20 is the growing network of personal relationships and friendships that have made everything else possible. One measure of organizational effectiveness has been the extent to which IF20 recommendations find their way to G20 communiques and policy directives, but even more significant is the less visible and more behind-the-scenes identification of needs and shared priorities by diverse religious actors and concerned experts. These individuals, the real heroes of our work, make sure that relevant governmental and religious structures channel needed assistance all the way to grassroots, where the plight of the vulnerable can be effectively addressed, end quote. And then the last chapter is written by the two co-editors, where we talk about the long arc, taking from the long arc bends toward justice. And we discuss the IF20 in terms of the age of the Anthropocene. We note that governance in the Anthropocene calls for development of a novel understanding of global governance that has yet to gain traction in the international community. New cultural norms would need to be developed that establish societal boundaries based on collective definitions of self-limitation as a counter-narrative to the existing neoliberal emphasis on pursuing economic development to obtain a national fair share of the global safe operating space for humanity. And we end talking about hubris being replaced with humility, and quote, how the humble and meek are quite clearly down on the scoreboard of history. We call for collective wisdom of world religions and spiritualities to articulate a multi-faith theology of creation whereby, quote, man is not the measure of all things. And then the final quote that I wanted to actually read something from the book. I'll just shorten it in the interest of time, but he says, here we say together actually, we draw these essays to end the book, for all things end, even the very stars in the heavens. All things are born, live, and die. The living is what matters. We invite our troubled and troublous species to choose life and recall Tennyson's challenge from Ulysses. Come, friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
No, thank you, Sherrie. I hope you got a little glimpse as to how powerful this book is. And what the purpose of this discussion today is to give you a glimpse of some of the things that are talked about in the book. But also, like I said, I'm hoping that we'll have at least 45 minutes of time to discuss together about what is the future going to look like. What are we talking about, not just with IF20, but also with nonprofits in this interreligious space. What is the future going to be? I mean, we are all of us that work in this space are struggling and wondering, and that's kind of been a theme of this conference, this forum together, is the difficulties that we are all facing. One of the things that I wanted to point out that Sherrie has brought up is that Sherrie's, all of us here on this panel contributed to this book, and it was quite an undertaking. Sherrie and Juan, yes, and we're so thankful. I do want to do a shout out to both Juan and Asher, who are both here, who have, of course, contributed over the decade plus to this amazing work and also to what is in this book. And so I want to make sure that they are also a part of this discussion as we move forward. I do want to turn the time over to Yoshinobu. He's going to talk about his experience there and also in Japan, but an international perspective as to what's happening in this interfaith space.
Thank you, Marianna. Just I would like to say from the point of the Japanese ideas, because in Japan, the interfaith dialogue and interfaith cooperation is very, very daily life matters. It is very, very different from the West countries or other countries. For instance, only last week, I attended two interfaith conferences. This one for the Mount Hiei's player, and the other one is also the interfaith conference. Some come together for the dinner in Osaka. So only last week I attended two interfaith conferences, and also last week is very important for Japanese. Hiroshima and Nagasaki's atomic bombs 80th anniversary. So it's very usual for Japanese, but you cannot find any Japanese except me in this room. It's real. I wish to say why the difference of this situation. So, because you know the Japanese history, we have a long history, and my grandfather, he started the interfaith dialogue just after World War II, and he established many organizations. For instance, most famous one is World Conference on Religion for Peace. He established 55 years ago in Kyoto, and the others, and very active. But the Japanese idea is very different from the background. And also, I'd like to show that this IF-20 scheme was established from the Christian background, so-called Western countries. But there are more than 1/3 of the G20 countries. It's not Western or Christian background countries like Japan, Korea, China, Indonesia, India, and Saudi Arabia, and Turkey maybe. And even Russia is a Western country, but now there is a very strange attitude of their political leaders. So I think we confront, I attended from the very beginning of this IF-20 and also the G8, maybe with Jim Christie from the maybe 2 decades. But I think if the IF-20 is rotated the host countries, but we confront some difficulties or the struggles to the IF-20's Western style model to the accepted host countries' ideas. For instance, in China, this is China's one. Several years, maybe 10 years ago, we have a conference in China, maybe the ushers and also Catherine also joined, but they are quite different from that we want to do. The name is also the CASS, not IF-20. The Chinese government should permit only use the CASS. And next one. This is also the Chinese one. Next one. And also in Indonesia, 2022, we originally wished to have our scheme, shoulder scheme to the Indonesian host. And Nahdlatul Ulama is the world's biggest Muslim organizations, but they do not want to operate our style, and they said G, not IF-20, R20, religious summit, religious leaders, something like that. I was invited and also have an opportunity to have a speech, but quite different from our scheme. So if we use the rotation system of the presidency of, for instance, this year in South Africa, and next year in the United States. So rotation system, maybe it is very different from the year by year. So I think this is one of the most biggest problem for we will continue for our IF-20 scheme. So that I wish to explain a very fast moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last one. Yes, this whole IF-20 or Interfaith 20 has had a lot of different ways of looking at it, especially as we go from country to country. The idea of interfaith is much more embraced in some countries than others. And so IF-20 has experienced that as it's gone through the G20. And I'm sure as we look forward to other countries that we will be going to, things might also have to change as well. What I would like to talk about just for a moment is about the communication side. When I started with IF-20 about 6 years ago, it was interesting the difference of the need for communication, especially in nonprofits over the last 6-7 years. And even more so, I think, since COVID. When I started, it was just before COVID, and we were getting ready for the Saudi Arabia year. And it was interesting, as we were preparing for Saudi Arabia, I remember Rabbi Goldstein was very excited. He even came and told me, he said, you know, I've never thought that in my lifetime I would ever be invited to Saudi Arabia. And then COVID happened. And so the Saudi Arabia year, basically we were completely online. We did the forum completely as a Zoom meeting. And the positive thing is we did get into a situation where we probably, if you looked at the numbers that Saudi Arabia said, we literally influenced hundreds of thousands that year because we were on Zoom. And because people came and watched and discussed and became, you know, part of the discussion that year because it was all online. But as we move away from what happened that year, it's interesting to also note that our numbers have changed dramatically since 2020. Now, this shows you, just in terms of the website, in 2020, if you look, it's kind of small, but if you look on the side, we're talking hundreds. So the big dip was when we had, this is looking at Saudi Arabia, but also looking as we're preparing for Italy and Bologna. As you're looking at those numbers, you're talking, the big height was 300. You know, all the other ones, we're talking 100 or less than 100 in terms of website views. But looking at what happened just in 2020, and of course we're still in the middle of 2025, so I don't have that full year yet. But last year we had 1,500 visits every month and 3,500 visits just the month of the forum alone. And so looking at the differences in terms of the way people are looking at websites, even for nonprofits. I can remember when I started working with I-20, Cole told me, he said, Marianna, if you can get 10,000 people interested or listening to anything interfaith, you've probably hit almost all the people in the world that are interested in interfaith. Now, I don't completely agree with that number. I think there's more than 10,000 people in the world that are interested in interfaith issues. But he does have an interesting point in that how many people are going to come to an interfaith website. I am seeing a difference, though, that I do think that communication can also make a difference in terms of how many people are interested in terms of what some of these issues are. Now, along with that, I also wanted to show you, Sherrie also mentioned about the ecological racism and deep sea mining. This was something that in 2020 really did make a difference. It was one webinar that changed the policy of a specific nation that was looking into the possibility of letting a large corporation change their laws to enable deep sea mining. And we had a lot of experts come on this webinar, and it just so happened that politicians and governmental leaders were also on this webinar. And when they heard people talking about the possible consequences of doing this, it made a difference. So one webinar can change things, but going along with that, if you look, that one webinar only had a few hundred views. But one thing that we've noticed, especially since the whole people are more used to watching YouTube. Just in the past year, we had 37,314 views, which is well beyond the 10,000 that Cole was saying that people are interested in. The other thing that I wanted to say is we look at the future in terms of the communication future. One of the questions that I'm going to have all of you in the audience help us answer is, what is the future of I-20? What should it look like? What should we be be kind of going towards. As I look at it, I want to see us be able to come together. One of the beautiful things that did happen because of COVID was that I think people are feeling more comfortable online. They are more used to looking at webinars. They're more used to looking at podcasts. And so because of that, we're able to share the message that we have as a network of networks, as Catherine calls us, which I think is a powerful way of looking at IF20, that we have a joint message that we can bring to the world. And so I'm hoping, as we look forward to the future, that we will increase website views, that will increase YouTube views, that will increase our webinar content, increase interviews on podcasts. We do have a podcast. And I would like to encourage people here that if you are interested on being on our podcast, we would love to hear your voice. We would love to have you be a part of the interview. We also want to increase communication on social media. Social media has become a powerful tool, not just for dancing videos or cat videos, but it's also something that we can use in a very positive way to be able to give the world an understanding of what we feel is important in the world today. I just wanted to end my little piece here with just one very short thing that came from social media just within the last month. And this is from a South Africa meeting that we just had recently. And just to show you, this now has gotten thousands of views. And it's just a very fun short video. So I'm gonna click. Let's see.
I'm Princess Dr. Yoshinobu. I'm the founder and the global president of African Indigenous Leaders. We've been attending this conference for the Interfaith 20. We're saying that we are indigenous people here in Africa, and also we must also find ways of addressing the people, either we are Bantu people or indigenous people. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We believe that as traditional leaders, most we need to be involved, or as indigenous leaders, which is the royal and the custodians of culture and heritage. We need to be involved in all these meetings. And I think for me, in all the working groups, we need to be there to guide, because we are representing a big group, which is our communities. And we are here coming to be the voice of our communities and of the people that we are.
The reason why I wanted to show that is, first of all, what I'm hoping IF20 communication can do is to give people who don't have a voice a voice. That this will be an opportunity for us to be able to allow people to, as we talk about the network of networks, that's going to happen through communication. That's going to happen through allowing people to have a voice in a way they haven't had before. And so I see communication as being a critical part of what we talk about IF20 2.0, that we're going to talk about in just a moment. What our vision, and I'm talking about collective vision of all the people here, what should it look like? For me, as I look to the future, I see it as being an opportunity to allow people to have a voice, to allow people to have a way, more so than this forum. I mean, at the forum, we've had about 500 people that have been a part of that, but that is just a small portion of the people that can hear these voices. And that is my dream and my hope as we move forward in IF20, that it becomes so much more than this one meeting, that it becomes something that we're really able to take to the world in a very real spot. This is just going to be, let me see for a moment. This is just, I'm just going to show you the first 10 seconds. This is our podcast. This is an interview we did with Christina Chapayas-Naki with Islamic Relief. Welcome to G20 Interfaith Journey. Yes, I have to hear my voice again. I'm Marianna. Sorry.
And I'm Stuart Bird. So happy to be joining you today. Christina Tobias Mahi with Islamic Relief USA, calling in from outside of Washington, D.C.
Well, Christina, we are so happy to have you here with us. Matter of fact, we want to start, we've worked together for quite a few years, but I do want our listeners and viewers to be able to understand how you got involved with Islamic Relief USA.
Oh, thank you for asking that, Marianna. So I've been part and parcel of Islamic Relief USA for almost 2 decades now. I hate to say how long. Dates me a bit, but I actually became
Okay, we can stop that. I just want you to see the beginning, just so you can see that we have that. So we can. Thank you. The main reason why I wanted to show that to you is that it is something that we want to continue. We would love to have weekly interviews with people throughout the world, and that's the power of Zoom now, is that we can have, we use it as more of a vlog, in that we put that both on our YouTube channel as well as on podcasts. So people can listen to it or people can watch it on YouTube. Some people like to watch rather than listen, but you can do both. So what I would like to do at this point is to open it up to discussion. I do have some questions that I would like us to try to tackle. And one of the number one, maybe after my talk about communication, that I would like, people here, panelists, but also out there, to talk a little bit about the future of communication in this nonprofit space, in terms of what you see as important, as positive ways it can be used. There are also negative ways that it can be used. But I would love to hear people's discussion about that. And while we start with the panelists, and I'm opening it up to the floor. Anybody has a comment, please jump in.
Well, communication needs to be more than marketing and promotion of what an organization does. And one of the reasons why this book is sort of once removed as an academic piece is to try and have an external assessment through the peer review process, to try to have an outsider's assessment with regards to, there's what we say we're doing and then what is it that we're doing. It's a difficult thing to try to measure in a sense, but that's what we're trying to do. And one of the reasons for the scope conditions is with regards to communication, there's growing discontent with the impact of environmental changes when so much of it is caused by an imbalance between the rich countries and the poor countries. So you've got, your Greta Thunberg who's saying blah, 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 and a lot of people resonate with the blah, blah, blah. And I think we need to seriously grapple with the urgency that younger people are feeling and take the science seriously and let that impact how we communicate.
So, for instance, I think the function of the generative AI is support for us, because I struggled very much for this part of the only one chapter I write for translation to Japanese to English. I struggled very much, but the next volume, if we will be happy to, very easy to translate. So I think the generative AI will support for the good communication between non-English speaking countries such as I mentioned, Japan, Korea, China, Indonesia, maybe Saudi Arabia, Turkey, non-English speaking countries. But I think that if we going next time for the IF20, much more, how can I say, good relation for understand each other. So I hope this function.
I'm really grateful to Sherrie to talk a little bit about, more than one point of view. And I think that is so powerful about communication, that we don't just go in one stream, but that we're willing and able to have discussions to talk about the different points of view. That's one of the reasons why I really enjoy the communication side of things, because it allows us to have those kinds of discussions. And you're right, it shouldn't always be, yes, I agree, yes, I agree. Instead, we need to show the other side. 100%. Yeah. And we have, please, let's start the discussion.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the summary, the history, and the beginning of the discussion of the future. I actually have a retrospective question that I'd like somebody to address. I've attended other G20 type events, not only the Interfaith 20, but the Business 20, the Civil Society 20s. One of the things that's a priority of those that I hear less mentioned here, and that's why I'm curious about what the longitudinal review is that there's much more a discussion about strategizing, influencing the governments themselves. Here, you said incidentally they watched the video and it made a difference. In the other places, that's an upfront high priority. And I'm curious, number one, from a longitudinal perspective, but even from an intention perspective, is it purposeful that that's sort of an undercurrent, or it just wasn't mentioned? But it seems to me that if we're serious about representing the religious communities, the faith communities around the world, and we take seriously what's been said in these sessions, that we have both clout and access to the people on the ground, there's a unique role that we should be playing in influencing public policy, and not simply expanding our discussion with other people who care. So I just wonder if you could comment on both the longitudinal impact of that and perhaps the intentionality of the IF20.
Yeah, no, I'd love Sherrie to talk about that, but I'm also going to have Asher and Juan hop into this discussion, because they've also been a part of this discussion for a long time too. So, Sherrie, would you like to say something?
Something that the W20, the B20, the Y20 do not have to deal with is the instrumentalization of religion to endorse a political agenda. Religion and, the separation of church and state, religious nationalism, these are issues that are hot topics that impact our relationship with governments. At this point, we're not an official engagement group. If you're an official engagement group, you get financial support from the process. We're not, which means we rely on a lot of volunteers. There's consistent discussion in the IF20 volunteer network and in the head office about how to be more organized on having strategic impact on the governments, but it's very difficult because of these variation on the norms of how church and state relate to one another. And given some of the rising nationalisms that are going on, this becomes even more problematic from an interfaith perspective.
I will say a few words. For instance, in 2019 in Japan, we have a IF20 meeting. We hand over our declaration paper to the Prime Minister's office, and just 1 week before actual G20 summit, head of state summit meeting will held. And so this is a comment of the religious people and hand over to the Prime Minister. So I think that, and also we invite House members and the governors or mayors for the Congress. So not only for the religious person, but also for the political or the economic leaders also invited in Japan. But I'm sure each country has a different situation, but in Japan it was happening.
And I will put in that last year in Brazil, we did have a real positive influence in terms of the government, in that one of the things that we had pushed with human trafficking actually made it into the final statement that Lula sent to all G20 countries. So yes, maybe baby steps, you're right, but is it happening? Yes. And I know, Juan, you wanted to also say something. Oh, where's the microphone? Oh, go ahead and then we'll have Juan.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have the underrepresentation of voices that are documented on literature. Usually here in Africa we get literature that comes from the West, but there is a lack of documentation of oral history of the traditional and religious leaders. I spent about 5 years under the UN in grassroots communities documenting advocacies and policy dialogue that should be reflecting on literature to frame the African narrative. So the challenge with us is the resources to frame our own and shape our own history. So I appreciate what you are doing with the historical reflection, but I am appealing for the partnership and collaboration. I have archives, lots of archives, stories of religious leaders intervening on the femicide of women who are killed and buried in sugarcane farms, and their private body parts are taken by witch doctors. And the traditional leaders and religious leaders intervened in those, in the poor communities that are left behind. Traditional leaders and religious leaders intervening on early childhood marriages. And it's not documented and it's not on policy. So you're talking now about AI in the African communities where the population in the margins are left behind. They don't even have access to internet. So I'm humbly appealing that as you document your narrative, let's partner, especially on scientific evidence-based dialogue that inform policy. And I would like also for us to visit Japan and see what the religious and traditional leaders are doing in Japan. I think that has been the gap here with the interfaith, the lack of linking religion and culture and traditional leadership. So I'm looking forward to learn further. Thank you.
No, thank you. Juan, I know you have some things to say.
Thank you very much, Marianna. First of all, congratulations to Sherrie for the book, and for Jim also, he's not here. I know that you worked a lot for several years for this. I didn't read the book yet, so I can't speak about the book itself, but congratulations. Yes, I saw it. But this is the reason of this session. A very important question that Rabbi is asked recently, and let me say my personal opinion about this. The G20 Interfaith Forum is a very strange, unique, and unusual group related to G20. Many times in the last years, we tried to convert, to make this forum in a formal track of the G20. When Germany got the presidency, we tried. When Argentina had the presidency, we tried. When in Italy also. And what is the problem? The problem is that for being formal group of the G20, we need the unanimity of the members of G20, and this is impossible in this case because religion is something not very sympathetic for many countries of the G20. All of us, we know what I am I'm saying now. It's not necessary to mention what countries are very contrary, against the religion itself, not one or another religion. So it's not possible to have the unanimity of the countries of G20 to adopt this track as a format track of the G20. This Catherine says something, or she said, for many reasons, well, this is the reason. Saying that, I think that the value of this gathering is that here, I think that we have a problem. Saying that we should have more presence here of the governments of the different countries of G20, or most of the governments at least. Sometimes we have some strong presence of the government of the host country. When I had to organize the meeting in Argentina, the inauguration of the meeting was the Vice President of the Republic, and 3 or 4 ministries of the national government were there, and many other officials of the government, so many people of the government was participating, and they received the input of this meeting. But there are a few representatives of other countries, but not all the countries, not the majority of the countries of the G20. This is something that we need to work on. The last year from Latin America, and also with the indigenous people of Latin America, which are absent of the G20 consideration. But the last year we made the bridge to these voices from to the leaders. It is my point. I don't know if clear something. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan. Yes.
And I just wanted to say that we made a connection during break, right? And that this is the first time that the African Union has been part of the G20. This is the year that it's hosted on this continent. So this is our connection, and we'll be in touch so that there's maybe a chapter, but I think maybe a section dedicated to developing the data that you have that could go in this next volume. So we're responding, okay? And then with regards to Juan, thank you so much. You talk about how it kind of ebbs and flows depending on the connections that are there. I just want to add that even in the years where we have government representatives involved in the program, where it's real clear that the communique gets delivered to the head of state, if the recommendations were ever to impact decisions in the G20, they would never admit that the influence came from this group. Okay?
I agree with that, Sherrie. But that doesn't mean that we're not having a difference, and that's the reason why we're still moving forward. And so to say that, I agree, but the other part is that we are giving people a voice. And that goes back to my communication of all these ideas that we're talking about. We are a voice, and we are making sure that people will hear it. And I think that is the power of IF20, especially as we move forward. What is it? And that's the reason why I do want to talk about that for a moment. We only have about 15 minutes to the end. But I do want to open it up to the group in terms of where do we see IF20 2.0 as we move forward? Where do we see it going? Where do we see, what should be the impact? What should we focus on? And Asher, I know I saw your hand up if you would like to. Here, you can use the microphone. Where is the microphone? Oh. Yeah, let's let Asher, and then we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Marianna. As you mentioned, time from the very beginning, I did miss 2.5 forums. The half I missed was Saudi Arabia, which I was going to miss for visa reasons, but in the end I didn't miss it at all. But I made up for it because the Japanese forum we had, Miyake arranged back-to-back a conference in Kyoto, so I guess that made up. The other one I missed was Bologna, because my daughter told me if I go there during the COVID, she won't let me see my baby grandson. It was a hard choice, but I decided on it. And I missed the first one because I couldn't make it. Actually, we met in India, Cole and a few people. Most of them went to Brisbane. I couldn't make it. I had to stay 2 more days. There was Wallace, the judge, was with us. And Cole left his credit card to pay for all our expenses. And I was checking out. They told me, oh, you lost $10. I said, how come? Cole left you? I said, yes, you had a beard. And Cole said, paying for alcohol is against his religion. So I said, that's interreligious. I'm not going against it. I would like to mention, really 6 years ago, something really happened in the area of publicity of the G20 when Marianna stepped in, and there is no comparison between and after, and it's important not because if you do and you don't publish, you didn't do, but because we have to spread our voice. We have large conferences, some of the largest that I attend, but we can't make more than a few hundred, and we have millions that are waiting for it. In this regard, I regard it very important to have the webinars, and not less than that, the regional conferences, which I guess should be in collaboration with other local bodies. Miyake mentioned China. China is an example when we had to suit ourselves to some problems. Before that, I would say the success of this forum is that Cole decided from day one, no politics. And because I know many bodies that just disappeared because of politics. China, I remember we did it together with CAS, we did call it G20, and Cole rang me up and said, apply for a tourist visa, not for a conference visa. I said, Cole, you are wrong. Conference visa costs a quarter of a tourist visa. He said, if you apply for a conference visa, you end up staying home. Apply for a tourist visa. So we did a lot, and there is much more to look forward. And I really am happy about the publication that we just heard about today.
Thank you, Asher. And let's go over here. Sorry. No, let's go back to thank you. Oh, no, right there first. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Second, and then
My question really relates to your intervention from Japan and about the different nature, maybe, or character or profile of the different IF20s that were held in the G20 presidencies. For example, I was looking at the at the webpage, right, at the IF20. It doesn't mention Indonesia. It mentions all the IF20s except Indonesia. You provided probably a partial answer by saying that Indonesia was called R20. So I was wondering if there should be flexibility in conceptualization, that it is normal and it is expected for each forum, for each year to have its own profile and character, while it does not necessarily have to fit into one particular template. But if you could expand on that about the difference in profiles between the different the sequence of events, in terms of who attended, in terms of the issues that were raised, and the like. Finally, since I am from the African Union, probably I don't know if this particular volume addresses the African Union, which we're very proud that it's shown as a full member of the G20 or not. But if it hasn't, maybe an annex or a future edition of it can really feature that part that would be quite appreciated.
I completely agree. I will just say one thing in terms of the R20, we did not have anything to do with R20s. in that there were a couple of our people that went as part of R20, but not IF20. And so I know even Cole was unable to attend. So Sherrie, do you want to talk a little bit in terms of the book? What
We describe it in the lineup of continuity with each forum. When we get to Indonesia, that paragraph is called the conference that wasn't. There was a meeting held in Abu Dhabi to sort of pass the torch and maintain some continuity. So there was a communique developed that year, but it was not in Indonesia. And this is part of the East-West tensions being manifest that Yoshinobu Miyake talks about as a chapter in his book. One of the larger settings that we discuss is as you go from the G8 to the G20, and with the unsettling times of all the different, the COVID, all the many different things that are making international relations more vulnerable, there's this shift from the West to something else with the East. We don't know exactly where things are shifting, but those shifts are manifest in the tensions that emerge with the rotating hosts. And the tension was highest when Indonesia was the host. That said, the president and vice president of IF20 have continued to reach out with different educational initiatives with Indonesia, and the social cohesion panel, I thought, really reflected a shift from distrust to trust. I was sitting there listening and thinking, wow, this is something to celebrate. And it's taken several years taking those relationships where there was a breakdown, continuing to engage, doing some things together, and one of the collaborators ended up becoming the Minister of Education. So, there you go. Staying at the table, we use the phrase loyal opposition, religious soft power as loyal opposition, to talk about having this critical disagreement in the context of building relationships.
So, to bring some of these points back to the question that Marianna was asking about the future of the IF20. One of the R20 indicates an interesting development in this ecosystem that Sherrie does really well. She and Jim do really well in the books that they've published about this. And it's a major headwind, I have to say, that we now have one of the G20 countries that explicitly created a religious engagement around the G20 without the IF20. I can't understate or overstate how big of a challenge that can be, because now the door is open to other countries doing that and regaining control over some of this discussion over which they did it, because we aren't part of the official G20 consultative process. That's one of the advantages we have to that. In addition, we're seeing, so what that says, that's a challenge. Another potential challenge is the V20 that has come up, where they're talking about values and leaving out an explicit incorporation of religion, spiritual traditions, and philosophical structures to strengthen and support and generate these values. So what we're seeing is, from one perspective, the IF20 has clearly touched on an important aspect that wasn't part of this the G20 ecosystem. And because of that, others are starting to respond now. That's actually a good sign of the impact that the IF20 is having, and that we've hit something that's important. How does the IF20 leadership respond? Now, in saying that there are challenges, that doesn't mean we can't work with them, or that that's going to be our enemy and we've got to take down the V20, right? That's what our strategy sessions are going to be about. Not at all, but it's recognizing that these are, they're rising up to claim some of the legitimate space that we have been filling for a while, and the IF20 leadership will have to recognize that and respond to it, hopefully in evolving into a very interesting and powerful direction. But in addition to other opportunities for growth. I think more than any other place that we've been, that the IF20 has been so far, Africa has highlighted the importance that the IF20 engage on a regional basis, not continue to be at this very high level, muckety-muck, international global gathering. That there is power and impact if we, I keep saying we, I apologize, if the IF20 sets up structures that add a bit of permanence to their engagement with regions around the world. That's where you'll get real coalitions. That's when you'll get continued collaboration and see some more powerful impact. And that's one of the things that I see being made very clear here that I hope moves on into the IF20 thinking on their structure for the next 10 years is, maybe we need to work out how we can engage more permanently, more ecumenical, pardon the use of that term, it's part of the Bible, in regions around the world. And that's still to be seen.
I do want to reference one thing though that we have been doing for the last 3 years. We have had a meeting with the AU every single year. And it is something that we will continue as one of these regional meetings that you're talking about, that we're able to actually work with them about specific projects, specific concerns, and have that conversation. Now we do have three. Yeah. Okay, go for it. Yes, and then in the back, I guess you have it, but then in the front, please bring it back to the front, and then we'll do in the middle. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to highlight the tenderness that we all experienced in the previous session when someone really opened up their heart. I think that's what is unique about us. And if you want to talk about impact, then it's how do we impact each other's hearts, and I think that we all have that ability when we become tender. And looking at our ability to do that together, that tenderness, and it comes down to what the gentleman before I just talked about in terms of values, and also just to see what are our blind sides. So, for instance, there are the IDGs, which are the inner development goals, which are really going hand in hand to develop the capacity of compassion, to develop our capacities to nurture each other, to develop all of these inner qualities that we can do. Because when we work from the inside out, we can develop those developmental goals. There is enough food. So really coming from the inside. And my reflection on what you've been saying in terms of vlogging, I think that's so relevant. And would we want to get involved? My first question back to you would be, are you doing surveys here to get feedback? And are you willing to be, and I say you, let's say we who are here, willing to be really honest? And I'm leaning into also the discomfort of where we are and what we face. So for instance, yesterday's making 30,000 packages of food and then spending probably more than 30,000 rand on food for us at one of the most expensive places was something that was very difficult. I love the food, I love the jubilation. It was very, very difficult because they were on opposite ends of each other. So really looking at that and also looking at how top-down that feels. A suggestion would be, and I think many of us have suggestions and therefore the feedback and that introspective feedback to say, imagine that we can work with Seven International and make packages, but also take the time, if we have over 3 days, to go and make the food, and then to share that food, so that we eating that food with people and making connections on the ground, because those are the people that don't have the voice. And as you say, how do we get their voices? So I'm just saying, through the actions that you do, if you follow that through, to bring the people in. So thank you for giving me time, and I appreciate you and what you do.
Thank you so much. This is a perfect segue to the fact that at the end of our time together on Thursday, there will be a survey that I'm hoping that all of you will take. And we are looking for that kind of input, because I think that is brilliant, what you just said. You're absolutely right. And all too often, as I go this idea of an IF20 2.0, as we talk about what it should be, my dream is that it's not just one person's idea of what it should be, but instead that it becomes a collective, that we are able to take those kinds of brilliant ideas and incorporate them as we move forward. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm quite inspired by your work in the book for the simple reason that I'm also being tasked to compile a history of our people in South Africa. And it's 100 years a period from 1980, 1930. But the last 30 years of 1990 to year 2020, which is the struggle for recognition. So I was quite inspired about how you use communication in terms of getting the voice, and seeing that this is the first IF20 that we've been invited, and hoping that this is the beginning of us invited and working closer with your structure going forward, and looking forward to getting more ideas on how we can improve in the lives of the people on the ground. Our people are all over the world, therefore we won't struggle to get their representation and their voices. We've been struggling within our country to get to be recognized, though we have been invited now recently that our community has been recognized by our government into interfaith, but it's still just a trip. So hoping that, just also to reflect on what the lady is saying, because yesterday afternoon activity, it really, for me, showed that these are the kind of works and projects that we can do practically together, besides sitting and listening, but practically to can bring change. Even in whatsoever country that I would be hosted, such projects should be inclusive in terms of the people on the ground. I work in the correctional environment, and one of my colleagues, when I showed them the picture this morning of what we were doing yesterday, he says, I've got a lot of such people on the ground who need such projects, you know, so we can make a difference collectively. So that's my comment. I give thanks.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time, but please let's end with this last comment, question.
Thank you very much. My name is John Gandomi. I'm here with the Baha'i community. It's my first time attending an IF20. I found it pretty exhilarating, actually. So my question is this. You know, of course, any objective observer of what's happening on the international stage might conclude that potential consensus and unity among G20 members is further away than maybe it's ever been. And there's perhaps no end in sight of that larger dynamic. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity here for the IF20 to perhaps through the communique process. I'm interested to hear how that works, how you've done that before. You know, to present a counterexample of unity to the fracturing, the unwinding, perhaps, of the international system that we see. And I'm sure will be playing out in the formal G20 proceedings. So that's a question around how do we, you know, notwithstanding the very diverse set of voices and discussions that we're having over these 4 days, how do we kind of bring that together in a very clear kind of moral statement?
Thank you. I will say we have given you in the packet some of the very specific policy things that we are pushing as an IF20. And one of the reasons for this forum is to get your feedback in terms of those policy areas. And so that goes to my push for you to, put that feedback into the QR code that you get at the end of this time. We also do a highlight. So realize this forum takes on a life of its own afterwards, in that, we will write up a highlights document that does get read by a lot of people in terms of what discussion happened here. But also, like I said, there is a communique that is given to the G20 countries about our feelings and thoughts that came from this forum, but also from regional meetings that we've had and other discussions as well. Well, I would like to end today with the opportunity of each of our panelists to have a final say in terms of their thoughts about IF20 or the future, in terms of your thoughts on your experiences with IF20, and I'll turn it first to Brian.
Well, I'll close talking about Sherrie real quickly, because the theme is about a historical perspective in the book that she and Jim have produced. If you read the preface, that's something I wrote. I'm not trying to promote my work, but that gives you a quick overview of kind of what we're talking about here. And it highlights the role that Sherrie has had in documenting this. She is a consummate academic. As you can see, it's not easy to get a publication like this through all of the editing, through all of the approval processes. But in addition to that, she is someone who has had vision that few caught on to in relation to this. From the very start, she saw the potential of this and saw it in the context of the contribution it's making around the world. Even when, quite frankly, some of the IF20 leadership thought it's kind of a waste of time, or that you're taking energy and resources away from what's really important. She stuck with it. She worked to get the resources together to bring her own students over to work on this, and because of her vision, her own character, and her just flat out stubbornness, she has documented in very, very strong scholarly terms this process, and has added to its legitimacy and its impact in ways that never would have happened if Sherrie had not done that. And so I want to make sure that it's clear to everybody who's here, it's not just this book that we're talking about. The book is the fruit of what Sherrie has given to this. And that's that's the message I would like to close with.
I just want to say amen to that in terms of all the work Sherrie's done. We can't say enough. And her work as a historian has really helped us, especially showing both sides, as you said, both sides of the question. I also do want to put a push for Jim and also Cole, both who have been a part of this from the beginning and unable to be here. I know they both wish they were here and a part of this conversation today. So I also want to put in that.
So I have good news. Last night I finally received this copy in Japanese office, my office. My secretary sent an email. Finally I got it. So really, so you get a book. And also next year I hope the President Trump's country hosted the IF20. So I wish to join for the I don't know what will happen, but I wish to join for the next year's one. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Marianna, for really championing freedom of speech and staying in the game, and that respect for difference. That has really been important to this. And thank you for your kind words, and yes, I am stubborn. I'll admit that. But it's really been a good team. I think loyal opposition is an important phrase that Jim and I have used because there is a lot of opposition. The IF20 has itself been impacted by the divisions that you're talking about. It's a fragile group, it's a fragile network, but there's deep respect and commitment to respecting our differences of opinion, but staying in relationship.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm hoping for a long future for IF20. That is my hope, my dream, and I appreciate Sherrie and all of her work to be the historian, but also to help us move forward. So thank you so much. Thank you for attending.
Give him a call. Right. I'm going to cut this camera.